Hey everyone, and welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. I'm your host, Paul Wagner, and joining me is
Christner.
And today we have a Living Psych episode for you, focusing on some of the seasonal changes and just the impact they have.
Yeah. And, I think the reason we made this kind of a Living Psych episode is the fact that it does just really impact all of us, right? I mean, we all can kind of go through impacts of different, the different seasonal pieces. And there are some real simple ways I think we can get through it. So I thought it was fun to just kind of talk through kind of different options that people have.
I couldn't help but reflect and be like, oh, yep, nope, that had that. So,
right.
And if we stop and pause and really kind of listen, I think there's more there than we maybe recognize at first glance. And that, that being one of the motivating factors here. But yeah. So great for you. Like as you're kind of going through, what stood out for you as a takeaway?
I think we talked about a lot of good kind of little interventions, but I think kind of the broader thing for me was, even something that's out of our control, the fact that the seasons change. We do have the ability to be intentional or purposeful in understanding kind of how we're reacting to it. Maybe more than that, the steps that we can take. And that, we listed a lot of things, I think, through the episode. And, there's no perfect formula. But if we really pay attention to ourselves, we can kind of put maybe the right formula for each of us. And so the intentionality, I think, it kind of came across, and I wasn't thinking that before we recorded. So how about for you?
You're talking about personalizing. And actually, I think the thing that stood out for me is maybe a bit more of a general area, which has been, in so many of our episodes, the topics of diet, sleep, and exercise come up in some way, shape, or form, which makes sense. It's, the foundations for self-regulating and self-care. But I think the idea of, especially when we're going through changes or, adapting, being, extra intentional in those three areas, really can make such a powerful difference. And, maybe helps to give us that little boost of mood or energy or ability to concentrate, persist through challenges. So I think that stood out for me today.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, that combination of the fact there are these general areas, but we can be intentional on how we use those different areas ourselves. And, it's a great point. And for those of you listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If there are some things we didn't mention that you feel would be useful, please join us on social media. We'd love to hear from you, or feel free to go to our website and just shoot us a message.
And with that, we hope you enjoy this practice in action episode. The weather outside is frightful, but we can keep our mood delightful. Well, Ray, we're back. And, today going into a topic that is impacting, I would say, just about everyone to some degree or another. And that's talking about the changing seasons and the impact they have on our lives.
Yeah. And not only on our lives, I think, how it affects our mood, how it affects our thoughts, how it affects our behavior. And, I think when we talk about seasonal affect, people think of it maybe because they've heard things like seasonal affective disorder, which we want to call out absolutely something that, there are people that go through. But I think we're going to focus today is really on the fact that we all go through some seasonal changes, and kind of being aware of those and maybe finding some ways to prevent the impact or at least mitigate the impact can be helpful for people.
Yeah. And I think something that's valuable to call out is that depending on the climate or the area that we're in, I think changes the experience of it. But I do think there's an experience that's had throughout. And so, the further north we go, we see a really severe, change that's going on in terms of daylight, versus the amount of hours that it's dark outside. As we get closer to the equator, maybe not as much, but, there's then just different other types of seasons. So rainy season, or, I think we're now in hurricane season. So, we're talking about some of this transition as we're going from summer into the fall and winter months. But, I think it impacts everyone here.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think, we're addressing this with maybe the larger population of summer to fall, but, there are such things as, I think research is about 1% of people actually have a summer affective condition, that summer is actually a negative time for them, and it can create some issues. So, I think this, maybe on a broad sense, we're going to talk about maybe how we all adjust no matter what our location is.
Yeah. Well, and as we were talking about this and preparing, some of the things that we were really trying to brainstorm and say, okay, so when we're talking about seasonal affect, where do we see it the most? And, some of the areas that really were coming to mind is like, one is just our overall mood, so as, we're seeing that the days are becoming shorter, less sunlight, maybe feeling like less productive, it can then have us feeling, having a greater sense of maybe dread, or, feeling, a bit more lethargic. And sometimes we maybe misappropriate where that's coming from, or how that's manifesting in our lives. Like, Ray, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of dynamics related to season changes. And I mean, I think one, just like you said, the productivity that we have in some ways just naturally changes. I mean, I know in the summertime, I get off work late, it's still daylight. I can go outside and still do things, There's more things we're doing on the weekends, whether it's, picnics or, sporting things that we can go to, whatever it might be. Our schedules are full in the summer, and I would say for the most part, with good things, we're taking trips, we're doing all these things. And then, school starts for kids and schedules now tighten up. And, for those who have summers off, they go back to work and all of these things. And so our ability to do things, maybe even just taking care of things around our house, might change.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is those environmental pieces. Then I think the other environmental pieces, you mentioned about reduced sunlight. I mean, I think that's a lot of at least the research that's out there does suggest that reduced sunlight does have a biological impact. We produce less serotonin, we produce less melatonin. And, even things like vitamin D deficiencies become more kind of risk factors. So we might physically feel different from those changes.
Yeah. And I think such a valuable thing to call out because, whether, it's clients I'm sitting with or friends or even, myself, like if I'm not attentive to that, the impact that some of those changes are having, it can really start to build up and manifest in ways that, maybe I am a bit more aggravated, or, maybe I'm putting things off and feeling then a sense of like, why even bother, or like that. Or with productivity, like those increased schedules and maybe I'm feeling more overwhelmed and more stressed and feeling, quite literally there's not enough hours during the day,
right.
Really focusing on that daylight piece of it. So I think if we don't attend to that, it can then feel like it's a personal failing, or it's a personal experience that we're then judging ourselves and labeling ourselves. And a part of that, I think, is also, it can then bring on some negative thought patterns that are there when we are kind of misappropriating, or, our thoughts being influenced by these environmental factors are taking this tone of, I'm either dismissive, or things are feeling helpless, hopeless, feeling more overwhelmed, feeling more aggravated and irritated. So I think that, mood, thoughts, the experience of stress, and like all of these things are really important factors to keep in mind.
Yeah. And I think definitely having people pay attention to the fact that we do have to watch attributing it to a behavior of our own, or labeling ourselves with it. I shared before we were recording today. I had somebody just this week who's a very active working mom. Does a ton of stuff. And she started describing herself as lazy. And, when we started breaking it down, it was just, they're not able to do things that they were doing all summer long. And rather than kind of acknowledging and, maybe just accepting the fact that this is where we're at in the year and our lives are changing, she kind of started this personal attack, and that can get down a really unhealthy path. Now, I'm grateful for her for kind of bringing it up, and we were able to kind of process through that. But sometimes I think people can take that and just, again, kind of assign something to themselves that is just something we're all going through.
And one other thought that comes to mind, and I think it's a contributing factor, is these are typically the months that we see an increase in sickness and illnesses occurring, which I think can also contribute to, physically having the impact, but also it then, adds pressure, I'm behind at work because I had to take some sick days, or, things are piling up around the house because I haven't had the energy and motivation there. So all of these different pieces that plays such a big role. And even, I was having a conversation with my wife, and she's just now getting over a cold that, for a moment, it did really kind of drain her. And then there's some negative talk there that's like, I'm not doing enough. And it's like, well, let's take some time to really kind of look at it accurately. I want you to give yourself some grace. Let's not have those harsh negative thoughts. So this might be hasty to say, but of all the different impacts, I think that's the one that we don't recognize that it's there, but it then is almost kind of like it's silently chipping away at our self-esteem, chipping away at our motivation. So I really think that's an important piece to be mindful of.
Yeah. It can take us down a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah.
And that, so, yeah, I think, as we're talking about these things, I think one thing maybe to encourage people to do is, when you are feeling like, okay, maybe I'm not productive, or maybe your mood is kind of getting in a little funk with the winter, pause for a second and just kind of maybe look at, okay, what's changed that's affecting this. We can't control the sunlight. We'll talk about maybe some ways to deal with that, but we can't. But, there are some things that we can pay attention and make adjustments to our behaviors. And, but I think sometimes we jump so fast to conclusions that we don't problem solve through it. And, we've talked about with a million other things. It's like it's pausing, kind of functionally going, okay, what's going on? What's changed for me other than daylight and all of that? What are the things that, are affecting? For me personally, I'm already missing certain things that happened in the summertime that I was able to do. And, I don't want to call it grief in that sense, but there is a little loss of it, and I'm kind of going, oh man, I gotta wait clear till next year to do X, Y, and Z. For me, I just pause for a second and go, all right, it's just that's just what it is. And next year, here's what I'm going to do. And I start already, I'm planning my time at the beach now for next year. And it's just a change of mindset. It's just that reframe we sometimes have to do.
I think that reframing in so many different ways is so valuable. And it can also then help and inform if it's feeling less productive. How do I reframe then? What am I expecting of myself? How am I approaching this? And maybe we're creating more opportunities for that. Or if it's, I'm feeling a greater sense of I'm missing out on opportunities or things, how can I be more intentional? If it's not season specific, how do I work to accommodate? So if it's, I'm used to hanging out with my friends and, we go out and we hang out outside, and to maybe date the episode, just coming off of, I think it was tropical storm Ophelia, and just made for a really rainy and kind of like a drab.
It's been gloomy. Yeah, right?
Drab time here in, South Central PA. And, okay, well, if we're wanting to connect socially, probably not going to be outdoors at this point. So how do we then, either having people over or finding common areas that we can go to and working to really make that a priority. But if we're used to those, we almost get kind of see summer as the norm. If it's just so easy, some of these things might take more effort, but it doesn't mean we can't experience them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that social piece is interesting. We've brought up the topic of connection multiple times, but it's definitely easier in the summer. I just think about how many times over the summer I have conversations with my neighbors and neighbors who I'm very friendly with, but we're not friends that go out with each other. But it's, you pull in the driveway, they're sitting on the porch, you say hi, you walk over, you have a conversation. And before you know it, the next neighbor's coming over too. And it's like a little lawn party that is absolutely enjoyable. I mean, people I enjoy kind of, hanging out with. But that's less now. I go home now and it's dark, or it's pretty close to dark, if not dark. And no one's out. It's chilly outside. So, but that social connection on a more casual sense, I would say probably for many people, the summertime brings more opportunities for that, whether it's where we're going or, kids playing baseball or whatever it might be. We're definitely in more social groups, I think. Yeah.
And there's one other area that it's, probably centered more here in the US than most other countries, but something that has come up in the therapy session, quite a few times since it started. And it's the impact of, disrupting sleep schedules because staying up late and watching football. And, now it's football season and it's if your team's playing late, you want to stay up and support them.
Sure.
If I'm staying up late on Sunday night and watching the game, maybe makes for a more miserable Monday.
Right.
And then if I'm staying up late Monday night watching the game, maybe it makes for a more miserable Tuesday. And so,
and the NFL is great at adding now Thursday night football.
So Friday. Yeah.
Right. So now, so pretty much, half of our week we get impacted by, those things. I think that's a great point because again, that could be a really good positive thing for us, but it messes with our sleep schedule. We're staying up late. Maybe some people have a few drinks, so that might make you not feel, as good the next day. And we have to add the fact that the game doesn't always go in our favor.
That's where my mind was going. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's sometimes I think, then we're in a little twisted mood just because it didn't go as planned. And so, it's this kind of layering effect, I guess.
It's like, nothing like de-escalating right before bedtime,
Right.
Coming off a frustrating loss or, a nail biter moment there. So, yeah. And, all of this to say, so if we can pause and be intentional and mindful and aware of, what is the impact, what's changed, physiologically, what's changing, environmentally, what's changing, and how does that help to let us have a more informed response to what we're needing to be doing. And so, we live in a great technology era right now. So, if you have a really busy Monday, but you want to stay up late and watch, the game on Sunday, can we record it? Can we, is there that ability to then go back? Certainly hoping maybe stay off social media, don't get the results spoiled, but, can there be opportunities there where we're able to do these things and make accommodations? But I think for us to be successful with that, we have to be very intentional and aware first.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that if, whether it's just those of us that have, just typical seasonal changes that most of us experience, or even I would say those who have something that's more related to a seasonal affective disorder, that intention and then really problem solving around some solutions. So, I almost think that as we listed some of the reasons, we've almost given highlights to what the answers are.
I think so, yeah.
What's the steps that we take? And, I think one thing, and again, this is common, we've said this with other issues, is I think just people getting a different routine. And, but the key is getting a routine, and whether that's, maybe you do need more sleep in the winter time. I'm pretty much ready for bed earlier in the winter. I know that. And so, accepting that and saying, okay, bedtime's going to be a little earlier. And, maybe, we're getting up at a consistent time, or we're setting exercise in our day, whatever it is, trying to build something kind of the new normal for the new seasons, I think is important.
And, one piece that you mentioned there, I think want to pull out because I think it's such a valuable thing of routine, but I think it also wanting to give it its own focus and just physical activity, because again, when it's a bit warmer out, it's a bit easier to like naturally be more physically engaged with activities, whether that's working outside or again, going to different events, walking around for, fairs and things like that. So us being physical and how easy it is to let that physicality go during the, as these seasonal changes. And, I know I don't really want to go outside and go for a run when it's rainy or when it's, it's really cold. And yet how can we, if it's important, either how can we adapt, maybe we're getting a gym membership, maybe we're, setting up, pulling up a YouTube video of doing some exercises or some yoga, Pilates, things like that, right. On the TV. And how can we just make sure that we are kind of giving our bodies those physical outlets? Because if we don't, then I think also we now then have a ripple effect of, if I'm not exercising, I can tell the difference between when I'm active and I'm not. And it's harder to self-motivate, harder to focus. It has a deficit on a lot of different areas. So,
and I think it goes back to one, it just helps regulate our body in general. Yeah. But, we do know that exercise increases serotonin. We know that it does help us with things like melatonin production. And we feel more tired at the end of the day. And I think it's important, it's funny because when I always talk about like exercises like this, I always kind of go like, sometimes we make it too complicated. Like maybe you don't need a gym membership and you don't have to have weights and you don't have to. My grandmother who lived till, she was in her 90s, she would sit in her living room and just do basic things like, stretching exercises and everything, and through her whole life. And it was such a healthy thing for her and such a, and it was just such a routine. Every day she did the same thing. And it wasn't complicated. She had no equipment. This was well before YouTube and all of those things. It was simple things that she probably learned when she was in a high school gym class that she just made part of her life. So sometimes I think it can just be simple stuff.
I think the routine, physical activity, very important pieces. And I think along with that, we can talk about like being mindful of our diet, certainly, during the fall and winter seasons, we have a lot more holidays coming up, a lot more food-centric holidays that, maybe we're not getting into the healthiest eating patterns. But also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Ray, but I think there was also a study done that shows that during the fall and winter seasons, we tend to also then increase our cravings for carbohydrates.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or like starches as well.
We do. Yeah. I mean, I don't know those studies in depth, but that's been talked about for many years that, it's not new, but we start eating comfort foods. We start eating those foods that, they may not be bad for us, but they definitely weigh us down a little bit. There are certain things that are more carb heavy. And again, kind of think about that in the fact that, we're coming off of summer months where, I spend my time at farmers markets and getting fresh produce and eating fresh fruit and all these things. And, that's kind of fading away. I think we still maybe have apple season here, but we're seeing some of that lessen. So yeah, definitely that. And I think the other piece is paying attention that we're eating kind of an omega-3 fatty acid rich diet. I mean, I think that's the other piece to it, whether that's eating seafood or salmon or something, or even supplementing. Mm-hmm. And, which I know many people do. And I guess I'd add on that, the other kind of nutritional pieces, we do know vitamin D levels are lower for some people. And, I always say, I tell patients all the time, if they're really starting to feel tired, maybe contacting their doctor, get blood work to see where their vitamin D levels are at. And something we can also, maybe supplement and has been shown to help both mood and just energy levels in general.
So we're talking about maybe some of these tools that we can use and engage with without too many external supports for that. One thing that came up in our conversation, though, that does require some very specific, tools, and I believe has been shown to be fairly effective, which is light therapy. And Ray, you were telling me like some of the specificity behind that. Do you mind kind of sharing some of those pieces?
So, so light therapy is not a new thing. It's been around for quite a while. And, there's not wonderful research, but there's actually some pretty decent research. And essentially for about $20, you can buy what's called a light box on Amazon. And there's a few little things. Most of the research on it says you have to have a light box that has 10,000 lumens. So it's a bright light. And essentially what light therapy is that, in the morning, or some people I think do it at other times of the day, but generally the morning, put this bright light on and you sit in front of it, do other things while you're in front of it. But about 20 to 30 minutes that tries to basically substituting for maybe our lack of sunlight to help with mood. And, we've seen it again in research, have seen some benefits from it. Is it perfect for everyone? Absolutely not, but definitely something that people who are more prone to mood issues, doing 20 to 30 minutes each morning, they may get a reduction in symptoms. And something that, again, while you need to get something for it, it's not buying $1,000 tool. It's a kind of a small purchase, and something that at least is worth looking at to try to substitute natural light. On the other end of that, though, is if people maybe aren't comfortable doing that, as the daylight's less every day, being purposeful about getting out in it. So if you are somebody like for me, I come to work dark, I leave my office dark, and I need to make sure during the day, lunchtime, get outside for a little bit. And, even if it's a little bit chilly, just standing outside, getting some fresh air and doing that throughout the day can be helpful. So light therapy is one piece of it. But if that's not something that you're comfortable with, just making sure we take advantage of what light is available to us.
When we're talking about light, something that I've suggested in the therapy setting before, and even have some experience personally with it, which is sometimes it's difficult in the mornings when it is still just pitch black out, actually getting up and starting to be productive. And there's certain clients that I'll work with that it's just like, it's really dark and I just can't seem to get myself out of bed like I can during the summer or during the spring. And we talk about, okay, can we look at some Wi-Fi lights or, lights that are set on a timer, that are on a that have a dimming capability that, okay, at a certain time, it simulates, maybe not necessarily as bright as a sunrise, but all of a sudden now in my room, okay, there's light. So when my alarm is going off, I can also see, and it's not then me fumbling in the dark, but, some light, coming on automatically and getting progressively brighter. And for the individuals that have been, kind of shared that struggle, trying that out and it's worked really well. I do think that they actually make something called like a sun lamp that almost supposed to be pointed at a wall or windows and simulate that like a bit more specifically. And like, I think there's like $5 to $10 Wi-Fi lights that you can do pretty similar things with as well. So, again, has a bit of a cost there, but if you're finding yourself struggling in some of these certain areas, that's part of being aware of it. And then we can have very intentional responses that lets us be more successful with it. Yeah.
And I think for people who really struggle, the idea is to try a few different things. There's no perfect formula to these things, but there's, a lot of different combinations that I think people put in place. The other thing I think I would add, we talked about the social piece of this, and I think that's another area where, we do have to put some thought into what socializing looks like over those winter months for us. And, it's different. It comes with its own consequences. It's, maybe we invite friends over our house, but then that means you got to get your house ready and you're probably preparing food and you're, so that's a little added stress, but trying to at least, making sure that we're around people that we enjoy being around. And I get it. We see our friends at work and all of those things, but really trying to go beyond that to have some interactions that maybe are more playful interactions that aren't just work kind of conversations, but people we just want to have fun with.
Again, intentional social interactions with it rather than easier passive social ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
And, even with finding ways of adapting and addressing even some of that stress. I know in previous years with hosting that, what's the menu? What's that going to be? And that's going to be really stressful. And then coming to the point of like, it's a potluck. Everyone bring something.
Right.
Like, it takes some of the stress, some of the burden, and then we get to try new and different things. And so again, like we can run up against some of these challenges and then, feels like we're stuck at it, but we're being able to really be intentional and be like, okay, what is the issue? It's like, it's a lot of money, or it's really stressful, or it's a lot of time consuming. Sure. Okay, well, what can I do to mitigate some of those factors there?
Yeah, I think that the other piece with that is I do this, so I think I can talk about it in the sense of in the wintertime, I really do have to try socially because I truly don't want to do anything. Like I'll sit there and go like, no, I really don't. Like I'd rather just kind of hang out and just take some time for myself at the house. And while that might kind of be good at times, and I truly do need those times, I also recognize that that's a bad pattern. And, again, so intentional piece and kind of going, all right, could this be the fact that I'm really not engaged? And when I do, it's really interesting because I think I go through the same pattern every year when I do this is I'll be like, I really don't want to do this. Don't want to host people. Don't want to do all these things. And then I go, okay, like we have to do it. And then it's just a wonderful time. And it's actually, we have a lot of fun. And yes, it's a lot of work, but completely worth it at the end. Like it ends up being this really good thing. But again, we got to pay attention that we don't get in our own heads. And it's easy to find all the roadblocks to not do it. I am good at that sometimes. But making sure that we say, all right, wanting to and needing to are two different things. And this one we just need to do right now. Yeah. It's going to be a good thing for us.
Reminds me of all the times I don't want to work out, but I know once I finish, it's going to feel so much better. And I think it's a very similar experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe to kind of end, one last thing I'd kind of want to throw in is, again, paying attention to sleep hygiene. And I know that comes up with other things as well, but, over these winter months, accepting the fact we might need more sleep. Some people do, and that's not a bad thing. We have to listen to our bodies, but making sure we do have, a good kind of, routine around it. Other thing I'd say around sleep in the winter is, summertime, we're outside doing things. We're not on devices. We're not doing screens, or maybe we're not doing them as much. In the winter, we're maybe doing that a little bit more, and recognizing that can affect our sleep. So, trying to power down maybe an hour before bed, and really kind of being, kind of purposeful in how we're repairing our sleep routines can make a huge difference. And having that set time to do that. I tell patients all the time, two things: power down after, an hour before you go to bed, and don't turn a lot of light on in your house at night. So we're talking about light that you need during the day, but at nighttime, put some lamps on. Let it be a nice calming environment. Let your body naturally produce melatonin and maybe engage into a different sleep routine. And that can do a lot for us over those winter months. And I don't think we give that as much importance as it needs to have in treating a lot of things. But, with seasonal, we just have to realize, we do a little hibernation ourselves, so we need a little bit more sleep.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, certainly not a deep dive into all the nitty-gritty interventions, but hopefully something our listeners can kind of, one, pause and reflect, recognize maybe the seasonal, the impact that seasonal affect has for them, and hopefully some strategies that you can use to, make it a little easier, a little bit more successful, and getting ready then for the next seasonal shift and change. As we're going back into maybe spring, summertime. So
that's right. The seasons will always change. Right?
It will. So, with that, we hope you enjoyed this episode. You can certainly join us for next week. But until then, be well, stay psyched. The information contained in this podcast and on the Psyched to Practice website is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional, psychological, psychiatric, educational, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no professional-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host, guests, and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health professional or practitioner, please contact services in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please locate a supervisor with experience to fit your professional needs.